What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing some true crime, similarly sinister deaths in Minnesota. As always, I was being super picky about what I was going to cover this week on this channel, and I came across something that I found rather shocking. And it's not like it's the first time I've come across something like this, but it's like I forgot about it and I never brought it to the channel. So it's really saying something if I find something shocking. So I really had to bring this to you all. There's some stuff that's happened in Minnesota and some other places, and I'm wondering why we haven't been hearing more about it in the true crime community. Yes, it's old news, but is it old news? I mean, sure, the individual cases have gotten some play here on YouTube, but it doesn't seem like most people are seeing or have seen the way these cases connect. And once I realized they were seemingly connected, I found it very dark and extremely eerie. And I also thought immediately that something else is going on, something sinister is at play here. So buckle in, grab a snack, and let's discuss some eerily similar cases that have happened in Minnesota and how they may connect to something else that may be going on. Let's jump right in. I want to say really quickly that in covering these cases and in publicizing the connections I believe had been made between them, I am in no way, shape, or form trying to offend anyone or cause further pain or grievance to any of the families. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but one of the main reasons I quit covering true crime altogether for the most part is because of some backlash from one mother in particular who was so incredibly rude and abusive towards me for saying her son was handsome and smart and good looking and that I envied her relationship with him, that I vowed never to talk about true crime on here again. So toes in the water, I'm dipping and getting back into it, I guess. What's up, Cop Karen? Let's start by discussing Jelani Dante Brinson. Jelani was only 24 years old and had his whole life ahead of him, and he had a lot going for him as well. He had a 9-month-old daughter with the baby's mother, Dina Anderson, and the two were planning out their lives together. Jelani had just been promoted at his job at a local cellular phone shop, and things seemed to be going really well for them. He was a devout and devoted Christian who someday planned on becoming a minister, but the path his life would actually take would be one that was dark and sinister, and honestly, downright mysterious. On April 17th, 2009, Jelani met up with some of his friends and they all went to one of his co-workers' homes in nearby Anoka, Minnesota. After hanging out there for a little while, they all went together to another friend's house, and people who were there said Jelani was in his usual good mood and in good spirits, and there was nothing out of the ordinary at all about his demeanor. He was normally a happy-go-lucky and cheerful guy, and that's how he was that night as well. The group went to a third house, that of an acquaintance, and after only being there for about 5 minutes, Jelani received a phone call on his cell phone, and once the conversation was over, he abruptly got up and ran out of the house without explanation or so much as a goodbye to his friends and co-workers. It's unknown who called him, it's unknown what they discussed, but while his friends thought it was very much out of character and kind of strange that he didn't say goodbye and just kind of ran off, they figured there was some sort of urgency to whatever he had been called about and that he would be back at some point later on. Not only did he never go back to hang out with his friends that night, but neither they nor anyone else ever saw him alive ever again. While Jelani and his girlfriend did plan on moving in together in the near future, they didn't live together at the time, and when he didn't show up for work the next day, though it was another thing that was very much out of character for him, it was even stranger still that he hadn't visited where she lived to visit with their baby either. When he didn't answer numerous calls to his cell phone, his family knew that, along with everything else that day, something was very wrong, and they called the police to report him as missing. The police, to their credit, launched a search for him immediately, and they found some interesting and odd evidence near the residence where Jelani was last seen. They found his winter hat and one of his Adidas tennis shoes on the other side of a wooden fence near some old railroad tracks, and the match to that shoe was found to the south of those same train tracks in an industrial area. The evidence so far suggested he had followed a strange and seemingly very confused path, which cut him through backyards, across a railroad track, and straight through an area that was under construction. When tracker dogs were brought in, things got even more bizarre because they led investigators a 1.5 miles away to a random neighborhood bar. No one at the bar that night remembered seeing Jelani there, and he didn't show up on any of the surveillance footage that night either. It would take 8 days for Jelani to be found, and under the most tragic of circumstances. On April 25th, and approximately 1,500 feet from where he had initially disappeared from, a maintenance worker who was doing his usual rounds at the Green Haven golf course came upon one of the small and shallow ponds in the course. It didn't take him long to notice a body bobbing up and down in the shallow water of that pond. It was a strange scene, to say the least, being that Jelani's shoes had previously been found and he had been wearing only his socks. It stood to reason that his socks should have been filthy from the path he had obviously taken from the house where he went missing to where his body was found, but that wasn't the case. His white socks were almost pristinely clean, as though he hadn't walked an inch in them, let alone the strange and twisted path the previous clues of his belongings had led investigators down. Even just walking across a railroad track, even just walking however far away, I don't remember what it said, to a bar in the middle of town, your socks are going to get dirty. I am someone who is almost to the point of obsession with the bottom of my socks being clean, especially my white socks, which is why I don't wear white socks often. So I know this for an absolute fact. There were no signs of any sort of struggle or fight around the pond, and similarly, there were no obvious signs of trauma or injury to the body. The investigators first just assumed that the young man maybe had too much to drink and had accidentally stumbled to his death, even though the pond was merely up to Jelani's waist. But that theory changed very quickly once the bizarre results of the autopsy were given to them. So they're like, oh yeah, he's a young kid, probably drunk and fell in. Luckily, they were willing to change their tune when evidence was presented. As you'll see this week and next week, that is not always the case. And it's tragic and it's horrifying, in my opinion. According to that autopsy report, Jelani's body showed no signs of having drowned, had no physical injuries, and no obvious signs of any health problems that could have been accounted for his death, such as heart attack or brain aneurysm, things like that. There were also no drugs or alcohol in his system whatsoever. The only conclusion the coroner conducting the autopsy could draw was that Jelani's body had been placed in the pond somewhere between 12 to 20 hours after he had died. After he died. Sheriff's Lieutenant Paul Summer would say of it all, quote, "The coroner couldn't say why he died. That's what makes this investigation so difficult. It is particularly frustrating because normally in a situation like this, we expect certain things to be apparent. If he's found in a pond, you'd think he drowned. He did not. Or if he was dumped there, you'd think you'd find an anatomical cause of death or a drug overdose. That was not there either. We have very little to go on. There's no clear indication it was a homicide, drug and alcohol related or other reason. We know that somebody knows something more about how he ended up in the pond. Our goal is to determine if there was a crime committed," end quote. Police couldn't find any motive at all for foul play or any reason anyone would have wanted this bright and religious young man dead. The last people known to have been seen with him were all questioned and found to be completely and totally cooperative and weren't even considered persons of interest. Now, I'm going to update this next week, okay? Jelani was very well liked in his community and lived a very low-risk lifestyle. He didn't associate with criminals or gangs and didn't use drugs or drink alcohol to excess. Remember, he was very devout in his religion, and it would have been out of character for him to have been involved or engaged in any of those above-mentioned things. He had no criminal record, and no known enemies could ever be found of Jelani's. His wallet and money were found on his body in the pond, so robbery was ruled out as a motive as well. So what happened here? Who had called Jelani that night, and why had he run off like that in the first place? Where had he gone, and what could have possibly occurred from the time he left that house to when his body was found 8 days later? Remember, he wasn't found until 8 days later, and the medical examiner said his body was placed in the pond within less than 1 entire day from when he died. So, when did he die, and where had he or his body been for the rest of that time? If it was foul play, then to what end, and when and or why had they actually killed him? No one knows, and there aren't that many clues either. Detective Maggie Titus, who works for the Anoka County Sheriff's Office, said, quote, "It's my job to make sure I can get her an answer. I'm trying to give it a fresh set of eyes. In this 1,516-foot area, what happened to Jelani? Was he being chased? Was he scared of something? His death, to me, is very suspicious. As far as I know, he did not drown. We don't even really know what happened, but we know he didn't really end up in the pond by himself. I'm investigating it as a homicide until I find out differently," end quote. The her there that she's trying to get answers for being Jelani's mother. Those are some great questions, though, Detective. But unfortunately, they're all still unanswered, and it's now 2023. It only took 2 weeks for someone else to be found deceased under oddly similar and similarly strange circumstances. This next case was unfolding before Jelani's death, and it's the case of an 18-year-old college student named Dan Zamlin, who on April 5th of that same year, so 2008, seemed to have vanished into thin air without a trace while he was out walking along the Mississippi River. He had just attended a party in St. Paul, Minnesota, to where Anoka is a suburb to the north. Dan left the house party in the middle of the night, and many people who were there claimed he had been well beyond intoxicated when he did so. They went so far as to say he was incoherent when he left and went walking alone along the water. That's where he was last seen, walking along the river all by himself in the middle of the night, and no one knows, still to this day, what really happened to him after that. No one would ever see him alive again, though, and this case is very disturbing and seems to be almost connected to Jelani's in some sort of way, even though that's never been proven one way or the other. For almost an entire month, Dan remained a missing person with no one understanding where he could have gone or what could have possibly become of him. That's a really long time to not know where your child or best friend, sibling, friend, loved one, even your classmate is. On May 1st, an employee of the Ford Motor Company plant found Dan's body floating in the Mississippi River. Just like with Jelani, there were no signs of any physical injury at all. There were no bruises, no cuts, no scrapes to show that maybe, in his alleged inebriated state, he had taken a tumble and fell into the river. The initial coroner's report couldn't even determine the cause of death. Despite that being the case, though, the police investigating this case were more than comfortable just deciding without any evidence at all that Dan had simply stumbled and fell into the river. They labeled it as a case of accidental drowning, mainly due to the large amounts of alcohol allegedly in his system. The investigators refused to look any more into it and claimed it was nothing more than an unfortunate accidental drowning. Anyone who knew Dan personally, though, including his family, friends, other loved ones, and even several of his classmates, immediately disputed those claims. They were upset, and rightfully so in my opinion, at the lack of proper investigation, and they went so far as to accuse the original investigators as purposely bungling and messing the case up completely. The police only made things worse when they spoke publicly about claims that he had been having an identity crisis about his sexual orientation and that he had more than likely unalived himself. I don't even know whether or not that's true, because as I tried to look deeper into that, it became so convoluted. What I did come across a lot when I was looking further into the alleged identity crisis is that nobody said anything about that. And even if it was happening, like, people didn't think that was actually happening. And that actually didn't even come into play until after he disappeared. So I don't know if they, I don't want to speculate, but I was wondering if maybe they found a journal or something, but it doesn't say. So I don't know if that was the case. But either way, people that knew him best were like, there's no way that happened, regardless of what reason you want to throw out there. Dan's family, particularly and especially his mother, Sally, went on a quest to find out what really happened to Dan, and she/they weren't stopping until they got some answers. Sally Zamian said, quote, "There are facts that the police didn't look at. There are questions that are legitimate. The police not responding to the party house. The police not allowing anyone to look on that bluff immediately. The police failing to deal with my son's phone records in a fair amount of time. The Ramsey County coroner not doing all of the possible requests that I requested," end quote. Sounds like legitimate concerns to me. Sally went through thousands of pages of reports from the case, and she found a ton of inconsistencies, missed opportunities for answers, and a lot of evidence that disputed the original police report. In fact, it wasn't until she got a hold of all that paperwork that it was even made public that the original coroner found no injuries on his body and could not label the death as a drowning because that couldn't be determined. So the police decided The actual police officers decided that it's a possible drowning, most likely, maybe. Also, there was no actual proof or any tangible evidence that would show her son was overly intoxicated on the night he disappeared. It was presumably a bunch of also inebriated witnesses who were making those claims, and the police just took it all at face value. They just took it all as fact. So much of the original investigation was based on problematic witnesses and their statements. That's not okay. There were more than a few inconsistencies in the statements that were given by more than a few people who were last known to have been with or to have seen Dan. Let me just interject here for a moment, guys, and say that if a woman who isn't an investigator can find so many inconsistencies as this poor woman found, then I have an extremely hard time believing that the actual investigators didn't notice it and feel as though it's much more likely they just didn't feel like doing the work and they saw it as another drunk college kid who got too close to the water. I mean, allegedly, right? Allegedly. I mean, this type of stuff makes me sick and is one of the reasons I am convinced we need major police reform in this country nowadays, and we have needed it for a very long time. Dan's cell phone records didn't even match up with the witness statements who claimed he was all but inebriated and incoherent when they last saw him or when he left the party. In fact, many people came forward after the fact to say that he wasn't intoxicated at all and that he was in his usual good mood and high spirits when he was seen leaving the party. Sally found other evidence that had been completely left out of the initial police reports, and some of that evidence included an incident that had taken place just one night before her son had gone missing. According to the information she was able to dig up, just the night before he disappeared, Dan was thrown out of a bar for wearing the wrong wristband. Once he was outside of the bar, he had to run for his life and away from no less than 5 men who were in fact trying to rob him. I couldn't find anything else about this alleged attempted robbery, like who the men were, who tried to rob him, or where this happened, etc. And it's unknown if it had anything to do with his disappearance and eventual death at all. I will say this, though. Well, I have a few comments on this. The first is that I haven't ever heard of wearing a wrong wristband in a bar. I think maybe he wasn't old enough to drink. He was only 18 and was given, for example, one color wristband, and someone who was old enough to drink was given another color. So under 21 is red and 21 and over is blue. And Dan should have been wearing a red one when he was wearing a blue one, for example. That's just my guess from working in a few bars and clubs in my lifetime. And then perhaps he either found one of the 21 and older wristbands on the floor and put it on, or bought it from someone or something like that. There's many different ways to get the old enough to drink wristband. I think that's what they meant, but again, that's just my guess. I do know for a fact that it's very dangerous to just toss someone, especially someone who may be intoxicated, out onto their butts outside of a busy bar or nightclub, potentially leaving them no way to contact their friends or whoever drove them there and forcing them to find an alternate method of getting back home. But I digress. Another thing, and the main point I would like to make about all of this, is the fact that I cannot find anything else about the attempted robbery, which to me is insane, because we should know 100% whether or not it had anything to do with his disappearance and eventual death, because that's something that the police should have immediately investigated. And I don't want to speak for anyone, but I am also guessing that's the point his mother may have been trying to make by bringing this information forward. Whether it was related or not is almost irrelevant to the point, or to the fact that it should have at least been investigated and followed up on, period. I mean, like, how was nobody interviewed, and how are no witnesses spoken to, and how do we still not know anything about the 5 men who allegedly attempted to rob him? Still, today, we don't know anything. We should know all of that information because it should have been a huge lead and a great place to start for the original investigators on this case. But they didn't do anything or interview anyone, and that's where my absolute effing outrage comes from, and I am very sure I'm not alone in that sentiment or feeling. Another little tidbit of information that Sally uncovered is one that is absolutely shocking in my opinion, mainly due to the lack of follow-up, once again, by the original investigators. So Dan is said to have drank some sort of, quote, funny tasting, end quote, drink at the party on the night he disappeared before he left the house, and other people came forward saying they too had tasted something funny about their drinks as well. And in fact, some of those same people at the party who had a funny tasting drink ended up getting very sick from whatever was in those drinks. Could it be that perhaps Dan wasn't very intoxicated until whatever was in that drink hit his system? That could certainly account for the discrepancies in some people saying he was absolutely inebriated, he could barely stand, he could barely talk when he left the house, and others who said he was fine and hardly drunk at all, totally coherent and in good spirits as usual. It makes sense to me, and in fact, I have seen this time and time again with college-age students, specifically males, who are fine 1 minute and then leave a party or bar or whatever and are seen by other people or on surveillance footage barely being able to hold themselves up as they stumble along trying to make their way back home, only to end up dead in some nearby water source sometime later under possibly suspicious circumstances where the coroner cannot determine the time or cause of death, but the police chalk it up to accidental drowning. In both Dan's case and in the case of Jelani as well, please tell me how it could ever be considered an accidental drowning when it's said that neither one of them actually drowned by the coroner. Go ahead, I'll wait. Also, going along with that whole frame of thinking and to what we know as the smiley face killer's theory, Dan's body was said to have had an unusually high level of gamma hydroxybutyric acid, or GHB, in his system when he was found in the river. I will say right here and now that I do not believe in the smiley face aspect of the smiley face killer theory, but the rest of it absolutely chills me to the bone and leaves me to wonder what's really going on in our world. It's the same thing as the missing phenomenon in the woods, almost, only it's affecting city areas and college towns all over the country. I can name at least 10 cases off the top of my head that are almost exactly the same as Dan's case in almost every conceivable way, including the GHB in his system. So I ask you this: how is it possible that one human being, or even an extremely large group, are 100% successful every single time at abducting a young college-aged man without anyone ever seeing anything or noticing anything at all is amiss? I say it isn't possible, and that we perhaps aren't dealing with human killers here. I think I'm going to dive deeper into this in another video because even though it's somewhat old news as far as the internet is concerned, it's still incredibly fascinating, and it's horrifying how many people know absolutely nothing about what I'm talking about right now. All right, back to Dan's case. Sally thinks there are a few things that could have happened to her son. She believes he could have gone into a diabetic coma, and his friends or other people at the party panicked and, not wanting to get in trouble, dumped his body in the river instead of calling for help and potentially having cops get called to a place where there was underage drinking and who knows what else going on. She thinks it's almost certain he was otherwise the victim of foul play or perhaps even a serial killer. Other than that, there's no more information on either of these cases. Let's move on to another one, the strange and suspicious case of Chris Jenkins. In 2002, Chris Jenkins was a university student at Minnesota State. He decided to go out drinking at a bar in Minneapolis on Halloween night with a group of his friends and his girlfriend. The crew ended up at the Lone Tree Bar, which is allegedly in a sketchy part of town. Chris dressed up as a Native American that night, and he was in full costume. While reports vary greatly, the story told the most was that for some reason or another, an intoxicated Chris was asked to leave the bar that night, so he was basically thrown out and decided to walk home alone. Again, since he was with his girlfriend and a large group of friends that night, it is unknown why he was walking home alone. Many say it's what he wanted to do to blow off some steam, as he was angry because he had been thrown out of a bar. A bouncer who remembered asking Chris to leave and also walking him out the door reported he had taken a left on Hennepin Avenue. He had left his wallet, cell phone, and jacket behind when he exited the bar and walked into the freezing cold Minnesota night. Some people claim Chris left on his own that night, however, but that doesn't make much sense if he left all of those things behind in the bar. Unless, of course, there was some reason, alcohol or something else, something far more sinister, that he would either forget those things or they would suddenly be deemed unimportant to him, but we'll never know. Chris Jenkins was found 4 months later in the Hennepin River in the Horseshoe Dam area. His Native American costume was still completely intact and his legs and arms were crossed. He was also found with some hair in his hands, and it's been a huge controversy over whether or not the hair found clutched in the death grip of his fingers and hands was his own or that of someone else. Some are adamant it was his own hair, and others just as vehement that it was someone else's. Upon taking another look at the autopsy, it was determined that the only way his body would have been found in the position it was in was if there had been a struggle. Despite this, his case was initially labeled as he had taken his own life. I don't understand how we just immediately get to him unaliving himself and not even to like a possible accident or something. But again, I digress, guys. In 2006, however, there was a new police chief in Indianapolis named Tim Dolan, who, upon a closer look, did reopen the case as a homicide and started immediately reinvestigating it. Dolan went so far as to hold a press conference and apologized to the family for not investigating Chris's case as a homicide all along. There were just too many unanswered questions. The sticking point for many who believed from the very beginning it was homicide or came around to that opinion later on was the hair that was found in his hand. Whose was it? It was also reported after further examination of the toxicology report that Chris had nowhere near enough alcohol in his system to be considered inebriated enough to not be able to walk or talk on his own. And in fact, it's been said that most likely if he hadn't had GHB in his system in such high levels, he may not have been impaired at all. Upon further investigation into what's now being considered a homicide, a witness turned up who stated he had been drinking at the same bar a couple of months prior to Chris having gone missing from there. And he claims he was extremely sick and inebriated after only consuming his first drink of the night. He also claimed that, quote, a few men, end quote, tried to put him in a car, but his friends found him before that could happen and they saved him. Were these men just good Samaritans trying to give what seemed to be a very intoxicated man a ride home? If that's the case, then why have they not yet come forward? It's been 21 years. Why have they not made themselves known to at very least get rid of some of the confusion regarding this matter? Or at least, why haven't a few of them? Why hasn't one of them come forward? Going back to the so-called smiley face killer theory, if you go down the rabbit hole into this entire murder theory, you will find that the main idea here is that an extremely large group of individuals throughout the country who are operating somehow together to drug and abduct these smart, athletic, good-looking, well-liked, and normally very responsible young men and do whatever it is they're doing with them before throwing them in random water sources nearby to where they were last seen, but quite far from the intended end destination. The only connection? The smiley face that would inevitably be found in close proximity to the body. I, however, don't buy into the smiley face part of all of this, as I already said, but that isn't to say at all that I don't think something extremely sinister and downright evil is happening here in so many of these cases. So I don't believe in the smiley face, but I believe in a killer theory for sure. Back to the witness who claimed to have almost been abducted that night by some random men in a random vehicle. His friends were nice enough to take him immediately to the hospital because of his poor state, and it was found through tests he had an extremely high level of GHB in his system as well. The police were able to obtain the man's toxicology report with his permission through the hospital records from when he came in that night. He had been exhibiting all of the symptoms of someone who had either taken or had their drink dosed with GHB. What are the odds he would be randomly drugged with the date rape drug? What are the odds that this random guy was at this same random bar and was drugged with GHB, and then this, Chris is suddenly like this, inebriated, intoxicated, walks off alone, and is found with very high levels of GHB in his system as well? I don't know. I don't believe in coincidences, so I don't believe that's a coincidence. GHB is a nervous system depressant which was once manufactured in a lab with the hopes of inducing sleep and providing pain relief for patients undergoing surgery or other major medical procedures. It was eventually found to be ineffective at relieving pain and was deemed completely unsafe for distribution after the clinical studies showed a large number of test subjects were having seizures, intense and almost constant vomiting, and swings between unconsciousness and consciousness. So basically the subjects were just randomly passing out and waking up, then randomly passing out and waking up over and over and over again. Unfortunately, GHB became popular in athletic circles as many athletes heard about its effects on metabolism, mainly its ability to speed it up. It stimulated the human growth hormone, which is known to reduce body fat while increasing muscle mass. An athlete's dream come true. Later on in the 1990s, when these bizarre water deaths started occurring, GHB became a very popular recreational drug in these so-called club scenes. It was used here because of its euphoric effects and was commonly combined with methamphetamines or MDMA, as each drug played off of the other to enhance it. Unfortunately, The fast rate of unconsciousness is what has gained GHB its most dubious reputation. It's been used in an almost exorbitant amount of intimate assault cases, specifically date R-word, due not only to the fast rate of knocking the victim unconscious, but also because of the after effects. There's almost no memory of the events which had occurred after you've taken a certain amount of the drug. It should be said that while the body makes a very small, minuscule amount of GHB, it's not even enough to have any effect on a person at its natural rate of metabolism in the body. It has to be given or purposely consumed in larger doses to have any effect whatsoever. Also, it isn't automatically tested for in most autopsies, drowning deaths included. I'm actually reluctant to end this video here because these cases, whenever I'm reminded of them, they just fire me up and I want to just shake people and be like, is this normal to you? Is this normal? Really? Like, it makes me so angry and so frustrated, guys. These are only 3 cases in Minnesota of many, guys, but I'm going to go over one more here that happened in the neighboring state of Wisconsin. Then, after I end this one, I'm going to go ahead and write the script for next week's video and talk more about these cases from other parts of the United States. And, in fact, after writing this, I did do that. So next week, we're going to be discussing more in depth, many more cases of the alleged so-called smiley face killer murder theory, okay? I may have to name it something else, but that's what it'll be. So, you know, I got you. Let's take a look at the case now of Lucas Homan and his tragic death, which, no matter how you look at it, no matter how you try to slice it, just doesn't quite add up. Lucas Homan was a 21-year-old who vanished on September 29th, 2006 from La Crosse, Wisconsin. Lucas's case is almost the exact same as the others. He was out celebrating Oktoberfest with a group of friends. Everyone was drinking, partying, having a great time. But here's where things get extremely confusing and even downright bizarre. Lucas and one of his friends left the bar at around 10 p.m. They started to walk home together, but somehow, and it's still unknown exactly what happened and how it happened or why, Lucas and his friend got separated. The friend ended up in a local emergency room that night with a pretty serious head injury and no memory of what had occurred for almost the entirety of just that night. Everything from that night was just coming up blank. So, here we have the point of random separation and someone possibly being knocked out and waking up in the hospital. That point of separation is very common, almost across the board in the so-called smiley face killer cases. Many people feel this is all just too coincidental and could possibly indicate that the friend was knocked out and someone or a group of someone swooped in and abducted Lucas. This is, after all, the very basis of this smiley face killer theory. While the paranormal community searches for answers to all of the missing people just vanishing around the world without a trace in the supernatural realm, some people are looking for a more human element. Things like the GHB levels and this particular friend's head injury and blackout are what are leading them down this path. At this point, it's actually more like a rabbit hole. It's not even a path anymore. When Lucas didn't show up for a golf outing the next day, he was reported as missing. Search dogs scoured the area where Lucas had been seen last, and according to the official police report, one of the dogs actually got a hit. The pooch alerted on a van that belonged to a local band member. I'm not sure if these were just regular search dogs or cadaver dogs, but either way, it was a pretty interesting lead. The band member just happened to have been playing a gig in the same bar Lucas was last seen leaving the night before. Somehow, somewhere, someone came to the conclusion that the dog's alert was inconclusive and the band member was never named as a suspect or charged with any crime. The friend who was with Lucas that night, the one who said he had just blacked out when he turned up at the emergency room with a head injury, he was charged with obstruction of justice when the authorities found out, despite him telling the investigators he couldn't remember, he had in fact been telling multiple stories to multiple different people who later came forward and told the police those stories. None of those alternate stories that he was running around telling anyone who would listen actually had him blacking out like he told the police he had done. In fact, he seems to have told the same story almost across the board to everyone with just little differences here and there. He had been overheard saying that Lucas had gotten into an altercation and fled, and that was the last time he saw him. He then reported to yet another person that he had been cut when he was punched, the head injury, because Lucas had gotten into a fight with 3 other bar patrons. He also told a story about how Lucas had decided to urinate outside of the bar right next to the band's van. It wasn't just some random member of that band either, coincidentally or not, depending on what you believe. It was the same band member who owned that van that the dog got a hit on. Allegedly, this band member thought Lucas had urinated on some of their equipment and started beating Lucas up until the friend ran off after trying to break it up and getting hit. Lucas goes out of the bar. This is all alleged. He urinates next to a van. The owner of the van, who also happens to be in this band, comes over and is like, hey, urinate on my equipment, starts beating the crap out of Lucas. The friend runs up, tries to help, gets hit once, and runs off, fearing for his life, I guess. I don't know. It really confuses people, because if this friend actually got hit during an altercation outside of a bar, would it really be that bad that you not only need to rush to the emergency room, but also that you feel the need to lie to police officers conducting an investigation into the disappearance of your best friend, who you were the last one to be seen alive with besides his killers? I don't know. I mean, I think I would rather just admit that I left my friend to get beat up, and I feel guilty that something happened to him after that. 3 days after last being seen walking home from the bar, Lucas Homan's body was found floating in the Mississippi River. The autopsy report listed, quote, acute alcohol intoxication, end quote, as a major contributing factor in Lucas's death. Lucas's parents are more than confused, to say the least. His mother, Patty, said that she was terrified of her son going anywhere near the Mississippi River. She stated that every time he would leave her when they were visiting, she would yell, quote, don't go near the water, end quote. The reason his parents were so concerned with the water was the 7 other young men who had gone missing and ended up in that river. 7 mysterious drownings in even fewer years. More eerily, when Lucas's mother would yell this to him about the water, she said he would respond every time by laughing and explaining to her, quote, Mom, I've never even been to the water. Everything we do is away from the water. I have no reason to go to the water, end quote. Lucas's parents, Patty and Jerry, said his death makes no sense because they know for an absolute fact, with 100% certainty, he wouldn't have gone anywhere near the river's edge. And also, the river was nowhere near his route home, which is allegedly where he was walking to when he left the bar that fateful night. Lucas's is yet another case where the blood wasn't tested for GHB. It isn't a normal substance for an autopsy to just initially test for. The weekend before he went missing, Lucas and his friends were just casually discussing the tragic and mysterious drowning deaths of the previously mentioned 7 other young men, when Lucas allegedly told his friends, quote, you pretty much have to be a dummy to drown in the river, end quote. Have there ever been, more fateful words spoken? In a documentary made about some of these strange drowning cases and the possibility of a smiley face killer or killers, an underwater forensic expert was brought in to help review some of the evidence in the Lucas Homan case, and what they had to say was very interesting, to say the least. The underwater forensic expert's name is Bobby Chacon, and I could be pronouncing that wrong, maybe Chacon. The team also consulted with both a forensic footwear specialist named Marty Ludis and William Moore, who is a forensic toolmark analyst. All 3 of these men are experts and very well respected in their fields. Chacon estimated that Lucas had only been in the water for 3 hours. 3 hours, which goes against what the police wrote in their official statement, which was that he had been in the water the entire time he had been missing, which was around 50 hours. This begs the question, where was he for the other 47 hours he was missing? And another question, actually, where did the police get the information that he was in the water for the entire almost 50 hours? Guess, little guesstimation, little educated guesstimation there, officer. This is another thing that comes up constantly when discussing the smiley face killers. A lot of the victims are found in water and have been missing for days or even weeks, but it's later found they've only been in the water for hours or even a few days. Where were they the rest of the time? Were they being tortured? Unfortunately, we still don't know, and maybe we never will. Bobby Chacon wasn't the only one whose expert opinion contradicted the official autopsy and coroner's findings either. Moore and Ludis analyzed the marks and bruises, scrapes, and scratches all over Lucas's body when he was pulled out of the river. The police and eventually the coroner stated officially that these marks were all completely consistent with being dragged through a river and hitting logs and rocks and anything else which may have gotten in the way of a decomposing body. However, Ludus and Moore concluded that the marks on Lucas's forehead were consistent with someone pinning him down with the sole of their foot. So, a boot pressed against his forehead, keeping him from getting up. Many people started asking questions about all of this and wondering how in the world the official police reports and the autopsy could have been so very different from the subsequent investigation. After all, what do these outside experts have to gain from any of this? The local authorities and even the coroner are probably thinking about the absolute panic and hysteria, which would surely follow an announcement of this magnitude. A single or a group of serial killers running around abducting and murdering our nation's youth without leaving any trace of themselves across a span of more than a decade. Were they covering this up on purpose, or were they just so inept at their job to have gotten it so horribly wrong, at least according to 3 outside forensic experts with absolutely nothing to gain by their findings, one way or the other? Based on the minimal decomposition and wound pattern, these experts concluded that Lucas Homan's death could not have been that of an accidental drowning. It absolutely could not have been. Though it doesn't officially say where, it's been reported in other smiley face killer investigations that there was, in fact, a smiley face painted near where Lucas's body was found. Next week, guys, I will bring you more about the smiley face killer murder theory, but like I said, I think I may have to call it something else because they'll just see smiley face murder and they'll tag me for the ad revenue thing that they do. I don't know. Like I said, I believe in all of it except the smiley face aspect, but, you know, that could just be me being a child who was born in the 80s and did a lot of my growing up in the 90s, where smiley faces were legit painted and scrolled everywhere. Doesn't mean it isn't true. It just means I'm a bit skeptical of the smiley face aspect. However, I am absolutely willing to entertain the notion of people who are causing these deaths leaving a smiley behind somewhere in order to just keep reporting on these types of cases. I'm starting to think, though, the more I work in the paranormal community, that we could have something inhuman on our hands here. And in fact, I lean towards it being something inhuman. So I don't want to disrespect the families by bringing those kinds of theories into this. So next week, I'm just going to cover the smiley face killer murder theory, you know, straight facts. And then if you guys want, I will elaborate as to a few of the things that I think supernaturally, paranormally, extraterrestrially could be going on. Just like I think is going on with the missing in the woods. Also, I know I'm a little bit late to the party, and this is somewhat considered to be old news, but I bet anything that the families, friends, and loved ones of the deceased in these cases could never think anything about any of it is old news. And that's why I decided to cover these cases and why I'm going to cover the full story next week. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me, if you want to see more videos like this, if you want me to keep doing the pre-recorded premieres on Monday mornings, and if you enjoyed yourself and each other in the premiere, hanging out, right? Spread the love by sharing this video, leave a positive comment in the comment section, and subscribe if you haven't already, all right? I want Gemma Jade to grow, obviously. That's me, that's my brand. This is who I am and what I do, and I absolutely love it, and I wouldn't be able to do it if it weren't for you guys, so I just want to acknowledge that fact. In the description box, you will find links for the Kindle and paperback versions of all 3 of my books, Encounters with Evil, 101 True and Terrifying Stories, Missing the Fae Theory, and Shadow Entities, Sleep Paralysis, and Beyond, and Danger at Your Doorstep, Terrifying Encounters with the Black-Eyed Kids is book number 4. It's not out yet, but it is coming. I know a lot of you are looking forward to the BEK book. Pick up the Shadow Person book if you haven't gotten it yet. Pick them all up. If you want autographed copies of my books, please be sure to email me, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com, before making the purchase so I can get it out to you. On Wednesday nights, you will find right here on this channel myself and Ghost Dragon ZW starting around 7:15ish p.m. Eastern Time, live intuitive oracle, where I pull one random card from one random deck for anyone who comes in and wants one. I appreciate the donations when you come into that stream looking for a reading, guys, but if you don't have it 1 week or 2, no big deal. Just come on in and see what's up for the next week or 2 for you. Also, Gemma Jade merch is now available. This is just one of the merch options I have. This is a glow-in-the-dark cup, okay? It comes with a really awesome straw. Check me out. There is everything on that site. Hoodies, shirts, cups, bumper stickers, card tags, puzzles, ornaments, keychains, tank tops. I mean, you name it. You could probably get it with my face on it, okay? www.drivecreations.com to make a donation to the channel. Donations are so important to what I do and being able to continue to do it, guys. Please look in the description box, PayPal and Cash App links, or the link to the Amazon wish list gift link. On Thursday nights, it's either myself, Ghost Dragon ZW, and Miss Paranormal Pixie at 8 p.m. Eastern for Chillax and Chat, or Conversations with Lara, the Paranormal Pixie Hour, at 8 p.m. as well. I don't know why I'm so jumbled right now. I'm just like so many things. Friday nights at midnight, Conversations with the Ghost Dragon, Midnight Vibes, all right here on this channel. Again, let me know what you all think. If you want a personal intuitive oracle reading from me, if you want information on any of the other services that I provide, the things that I make and sell, there's not a lot of information out there about that aside from me talking about it. So if you are interested in any of that, of any of the video spiritual sessions that I do, anything like that, if you have any questions about anything you want to talk to me about, say to me, GemmaJadeParanormal at gmail.com. I think that just about covers it. Please go buy you some Gemma Jade merch. The first 15 people to send me a picture wearing Gemma Jade merchandise, drinking out of Gemma Jade merchandise, or just having Gemma Jade merchandise, I'm going to send you guys something awesome or give you like a bunch of free readings. I'm going to figure something out for y'all. So, yeah, let me know. Hit me up. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, you're awesome. You're amazing. You are capable. You can do it. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do anything. Don't let anyone make you feel less than. That is just them playing out their own insecurities on you and more than likely being jealous. If nobody told you today, I definitely believe in you. I believe in you 100% that you can do anything that you put your mind to. You can manifest your very best destiny and make all of your dreams come true. I'm living proof, guys. If you saw where I was 6 years ago, you may not even believe it. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.